Alright, I think it's time we talked about Iron Man Armored Adventures.
You mean that show with the teenage Tony Stark?
Yes, the show with the teenage Tony Stark. Okay, listen, I was not an Iron Man fan. Heck, even as a comic book fan, I didn't even know who he was until his first movie came out. So even when I was a kid when I saw this show, I initially thought it was a little gimmicky. But when you watch that first episode, and you hear that theme song, you see this? These are your notes. They're melted. Did you get it? Alright, next bit. From that point on, you understand what you're about to see is gonna be great. Let me explain. One of the doubts you may have about this show is over its art style. Sure, 3D animation hadn't exactly been perfected for kids shows, but the late 2000s changed all that, with landmark shows like Clone Wars and the much less known Tron Uprising. And Iron Man Armored Adventures was also an exception in this fact, because it wasn't just about the type of animation that it was, but also its art style. Unlike other 3D cartoons, like Jimmy Neutron for example, it didn't try to copy the overly cartoony nature of 2D cartoons into the 3D format. Chances are, unless you have a massive budget, you're not going to be able to do nearly as much with 3D animation as you are with classical cell animation. While Jimmy Neutron was not a bad show by any means, its animation really did not age well in relation to the art style it was trying to mimic. And as a result, it forced most 3D animation, specifically for kids shows, to go with a more realistic art and animation style. Armored Adventures did just that, going for a minimalistic and futuristic style, something that, conveniently, also fits the world of the show. This style could easily be referenced for speedy production without losing quality, which resulted in a lot of other kids shows from the early 2000s looking very cheap. Armored Adventures aired in November of 2008. Coming off the success of the first Iron Man film and the cancellations of two other Marvel shows, Spectacular Spider-Man and Wolverine and the X-Men. Interestingly, both these shows, both fantastic in their own right, only had 2 seasons before cancellation, a fate that would be shared by Armored Adventures and Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Marvel had a poor habit of canceling their best shows, but unfortunately they seem to have lost this habit in recent years, considering their current line of cartoons are extremely poor in quality and production value. But that's a rant for another day. The point is, Marvel realized, people really seem to like this futuristic armored dude. And as a result, we were graced with the amazingly unique Iron Man Armored Adventures. Now let's cover this part really quick, because I want to get to the good stuff. Tony Stark is a kid inventor that helps his father create inventions for Stark International, but while they're on an expedition, they unearth an ancient artifact called a Makluan ring. As a result, Tony and his father are soon after attacked, and their plane crashes, but Tony is saved by his latest invention, the Iron Man suit. Since Tony is only 16, he is not able to take over Stark International for his late father, and must fight against Obadiah Stane, who tries to corrupt the company as Iron Man. This is in addition to Tony trying to find out why his father was murdered by searching for the rest of the Makluan rings with his new friend, Gene Khan, who is secretly the greatest Iron Man villain of all time, the Mandarin.
Don't hurt the face, I'm an actor.
No! None of that! Shame on you!
I am the Mandarin!
Okay, listen. I could talk for a solid hour about the designs of the villains alone. They were so much more than just a bunch of evil Iron Men, or lame ripoffs of Batman villains. Something that both the movies and even the comics have failed at. But this show was the king of villains. They were DCAU quality in terms of the supporting villains and the big bats. We had henchmen like Killer Shrike, Unicorn, and Black Knight, tragic villains of the week like the abandoned cosmonaut Crimson Dynamo, the manipulative Blizzard, or the misguided Madame Mask. And then we had S-tier villains like Living Laser, a character that started out as a mafia goon loser, but then was given the power to destroy cities. I won't spoil his character arc for you, but it actually made me tear up. That's how emotional this show gets. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we get the Mandarin. While he's not necessarily on the same level as a character like Zuko, he is very similar, but is more of a mastermind that uses the heroes for his own ends and manipulates their friendship for what he believes is his destiny to save the world. The Mandarin is essentially a Chinese warlord that leads the Chinese mafia in New York and wants the Makluan rings because they give him magical power, which is really cool because the whole idea of Mandarin versus Iron Man is basically a cultural clash of East versus West, technology versus magic. And then we have Ghost. Let me tell y'all about Ghost. Basically, imagine if Deathstroke and Spike from Cowboy Bebop had a baby. Ghost is essentially a combination of two Marvel characters, Taskmaster and, well, Ghost. Two ideas that are really cool on their own, but when they're merged together, you got yourself an S-tier anti-hero. He doesn't even have a character arc, but he's so mysterious and cool because he's just there to screw over the main characters for his own personal gain. They never even defeat him once in the entire series. I love it. Frankly, this is what I was hoping we would get in Ant-Man and the Wasp instead of just another science experiment gone wrong. And I wasn't kidding about that Spike comparison. The guy they got playing him actually sounds like Steve Bloom.
There's no beef in here. So you wouldn't really call it bell peppers and beef, now would you?
So what's it gonna be, hero? Make your decision.
That automatically adds a cool factor of 10. But enough about the villains. Let's get into the characters in this show are absolutely fantastic. Even supporting characters get character arcs. But in terms of the main characters, Tony has his usual quality of being confident, but thankfully without his full-on narcissism. And since he's a teenager in this show, he's a pretty emotional kid. Very much like Spider-Man in a lot of ways. He's not just a constantly self-absorbed character that doesn't care about anybody in his life until they leave him because he's so toxic, at which point he gives them the most pathetic excuse or apology.
Come on. Hey, I admit it. My fault. Sorry.
Golly gee, I think he really means it this time.
Armored Adventures Tony genuinely has a good heart, but his overconfidence and passion often get the better of him, therefore giving him character flaws and room for development. And the characters that help him most develop are of course his two best friends, Rhodey and Pepper. Rhodey in particular being my favorite character in the entire show. In a lot of ways, he's very much the morality and soul of the main trio. He supports and cares for his friends, but isn't worried about confronting them. Usually Tony. When they screw up. He's not just the black sidekick of a much smarter white capitalist that profited off the suffering of people in the Middle East.
Whoops, did I just say that out loud?
Rhodey may not be the standout star when you think back on this show, but he's also not meant to be. He's the best friend that supports and uplifts those around him. He also fought a xenomorph made of nanites by himself with a lightning gun, so that may or may not be influencing my favoritism.
You want this? Take it!
And of course, we have Pepper, the hyperactive fast talker that wants to become a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent because she admires her dad, who works for the CIA. While Pepper may not be my favorite character in the show, she definitely works as comedic relief. Not to mention, when things get serious, she is very passionate when it comes to fighting for her friends. That's a heck of a lot more personality than Miss I leave for 10 movies and then I come back and I'm married and have a kid with Tony Stark.
That's our arc!
Now don't get me wrong, Pepper can be annoying, but usually her silliness is more comedic and her actions don't happen simply because the writers are trying to push along their desired plot. Rather, the story happens because of her actions, which helps draw viewers into the world because that's how life works normally. And speaking of world, this show does an immaculate job at world building. In Armored Adventures, we as the audience get to discover how crazy and new the Marvel Universe is, along with the main characters. Never heard of AIM? Neither have Tony and Rhodey. In this world, the Hulk is an urban legend like Bigfoot, which is such a cool way of bringing him in, because that's absolutely how that would work in a living, breathing, fleshed out world. Same with isolated countries like Wakanda or Latveria. And the characters go to school, which is perfect because it makes sense in terms of the world, but can also work exposition in without feeling forced. And the show doesn't really do this all that much, so it doesn't feel forced anyway. But going back to Wakanda and Latveria, we actually get to meet characters like Black Panther and Doctor Doom in this show. Doctor Doom in particular being a huge highlight because he's just as terrifying and insurmountable as he is in the comics. We get to meet Hawkeye and Black Widow, who basically start out as mercenaries that get into a bad crowd, but due to the influence of Iron Man, they both eventually become true heroes in their own right. Which, might I add, is a lot more interesting than them just just being S.H.I.E.L.D. agents with gimmicks. And don't even get me started on how awesome the X-Men episode was. It's a pretty deep episode about prejudice and racism, which is perfect considering that's what the whole X-Men concept is about. Even Rhodey weighs in, comparing the segregation of mutants to the 1950s. It's a really cool idea of seeing how kids view and talk about such things in the real world. It reminds me a lot of X-Men Evolution, and that is a very big compliment coming from me. Not to mention, this show was great at hiding Easter eggs for pop culture.
Sir? 42?
And for Marvel fans. Like in the X-Men episode, Jean Grey introduces herself as Annie. For those of you who are X-Men fans, I'm sure you understand that one. Pepper mentions Moon Knight, Tony references Reed Richards, and my personal favorite...
Who's there? Spider-Man?
Nope, just your friendly neighborhood Hawkeye.
That's so clever. Heck, there's even entire episodes that are basically giant references to the Alien and Saw franchises.
Analyzing. Easy. Now, consumable. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Consume.
I would be lying if I said that episode still didn't scare me. Now, I've talked a lot about this show, but there's still so much more about it that I haven't even mentioned. Like the terrifying version of Whiplash that, well, let's just say he had assets his counterpart in the MCU lacked. Like personality.
I want my board.
Now don't get me wrong, this show has its fair share of flaws. And heck, sometimes its animation isn't the best. But to be fair, those are flaws that are present in just about every great kids cartoon. And ultimately, this show did an incredible job of creating characters, world building, and it had a good theme song. Something that just about every current Marvel cartoon doesn't even have. They just have title cards. Because apparently the corporate higher-ups think TV show intros make people lose interest in a show. Golly gee, who would have expected a catchy theme song to be memorable over a decade after the original show first aired? Honestly, this show had everything a good show should. And while I definitely don't like endorsing anything released by Disney, just about every great Marvel cartoon is on Disney Plus, including Armored Adventures. So I would highly recommend getting it, if only for those awesome shows. But I've done a lot of talking. What do you guys think? Let me know what you think in the comments section below. This has been Bovine Designs, and I'll catch you guys next time for more comic book news, animations, and reviews. Y'all have a good one.